Okay, here we go. Chapter 3. Hope everybody's having a good day. Chapter 3 is on ecosystem ecology. All of your chapters start out with a nice little story. These are great information and they also are great to refer to specifically sometimes in your FRQs. This one happens to be about Haiti and the deforestation that's occurring in Haiti. The fact is, Haiti is using their forests primarily to make charcoal and stuff to heat their homes and cook their food, and they're using it at a much faster rate than the trees can grow back. So it is not sustainable, so they are deforesting their country. This actually has a lot of impacts. It disrupts a lot of what we call ecosystem services. And later in this chapter, we'll talk more about what ecosystem services specifically are. But some of the things it does is it can cause an increase in erosion, and that's soil sliding down the hill, mudslides, and flooding. It also can disrupt a lot of the cycles in the area, the hydrologic cycle, water cycle, and the nutrients. The fact is, throughout this entire year, I hope you find that everything is connected. Everything has repercussions. Everything affects everything else. That's the way nature is. So it shows a lot of that connectedness and how just doing one little thing can have a lot of ramifications. Okay, let's get into the chapter 3. Few vocabulary things you need to know. Biotic and abiotic. These are two terms you have to be comfortable with. Biotic means living organisms, living things in the ecosystem. So these are things like your bacteria, your plants, your animals, your fungus, your algae. Abiotic, A in front of a word you know means no or not. So abiotic, asymmetric, that kind of thing. So no or not. So not living. So these are things like your sunlight, your soil, your water, your air, nutrients, temperature, pH, those kind of things. Those things that are important in an ecosystem but are not living. So you need to be able to identify those. That's often a question on the AP exam. Okay, another term that your book does not discuss, but I think is important, is a term called ecotone. Ecotone is an area of transition from one ecosystem to another. So when you're transitioning from the forest to the meadow, or the meadow to a pond, or that kind of thing. These areas usually have very high biodiversity. If you remember, biodiversity is the number of species within an area. These areas have lots and lots of species because it ultimately has species from both the ecosystem, from the meadow and the forest. So these areas, they're very small little areas, but these areas are usually very, very teeming with life. Okay, continuing on. Energy. How does energy move through the ecosystem? Couple things before we talk about that. You need to know the two laws of thermodynamics, the first law and the second law of thermodynamics. The first law says that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So all the energy on our planet is the energy. It can transform into different types of energy, but energy is energy, not created nor destroyed, just transformed from one type to another. Okay. Second law of thermodynamics says that when that transformation occurs from energy from one type to another, some of that energy is going to be lost in the form of heat. No matter what kind of thing. You fill up your car with gasoline, not all that gasoline is used to make the car go forward. The fact is the engine gets hot. Some of that energy is lost as heat as it's burned. Okay. Really quick vocabulary again, you need to know what an ecosystem is, biotic and abiotic, and then producers, autotrophs, consumers, and heterotrophs. We're going to go over these four right now. Hopefully you've heard some of these terms before. Okay, so how does energy move through an ecosystem? Most of it moves through the food web. So two important things within the food web and moving energy within organisms is photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Photosynthesis occurs by producers and autotrophs. These are interchangeable terms for organisms that can produce their own food. From organisms that can do photosynthesis, they produce their food. We're not going to talk about chemosynthesis, but they can also produce food. Okay, so the formula for photosynthesis. H2O, water, plus CO2, carbon dioxide, gives you C6H12O6, that's glucose, and oxygen, O2. Solar energy goes in, ends up being stored as chemical energy in the form of glucose. Again, done by producers and autotrophs. Then that energy, either by the plant that produced it or by the organism that just ate the plant, has to do cellular respiration to turn that chemical energy, the glucose into usable energy to move, to watch this video, to write your notes, that kind of thing. So cellular respiration is glucose, C6H12O6, plus oxygen, O2, gives me CO2 and H2O and releases energy. And now I can move, now I can function. This is just the opposite of this. You take photosynthesis and flip it, and you've got cellular respiration. So pretty easy formulas to remember. You've got to know them, and you've got to know both of them. But again, memorize photosynthesis and know cellular respiration. You just flip it, then flip it. So who does cellular respiration? The fact is everybody does cellular respiration. Animals, plants, fungus, bacteria, everybody. Because even the producers and autotrophs have to convert the energy they made in photosynthesis into usable energy. Now it's in glucose, but now they got to transform it. And so do we. When we eat our food, if it's going to be converted into energy, it goes through cellular respiration and we get energy. Okay, now we're going to have a flashback to 3rd grade when you probably learned first about food chains. So, food chains. We have, hopefully they're a little bit more complicated now. Hopefully. Grass is eaten by the insect, is eaten by the bird. Please watch your arrows. Arrows follow the flow of energy. So from grass to the insect, from the insect to the bird, because the insect ate the grass, so it points to the insect. The insect is eaten by the bird, so it points towards the bird. Okay, so energy follows, the arrows follow the flow of energy. Your producer is your grass. He's also your autotroph. And then you have your primary consumer. That's your first organism that ate the producer. Secondary consumer eats the primary consumer. And if we had a tertiary consumer, it would eat the secondary consumer. All of these consumers are also referred to as heterotrophs. Lots of terminology here to know. Okay. Once again, producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. Those are the different levels in a food chain. Those are also referred to as trophic levels. There's different ways we can represent the trophic levels. But you just need to know that if they talk about trophic levels, they're talking about the different steps or the different levels in a food chain. Most of the time anymore we use food webs because food webs actually show more of the complexity of the environment and the many interactions that occur between organisms within the environment. And it's much more inclusive. However, most of our food webs, including the one here in your book, that one is actually simplified. That's not complete, but it's complete enough that we get the picture that certain organisms eat a lot of different organisms. You also can use a food web to identify your carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, scavengers, detritivores, and decomposers. Hopefully most of these are familiar to you. Maybe detritivores is not. Carnivores eat meat, herbivores eat plants, omnivores eat plants and meat. Scavengers are eating meat, but usually dead stuff. These are your vultures going after your dead wildebeest kind of thing in your picture. Your detritivores are organisms that eat fecal material and other little body parts that drop off like the lizard's tail, that kind of thing. So they're things like dung beetles and stuff, a lot of your insects. And then of course decomposers, bacteria, fungus, mushrooms, earthworms. They're the ones who really break down all this living material into the basic nutrients that then can be absorbed by the producer again. Just a reminder again, arrows follow the flow of energy. So from who's being eaten to who's doing the eating. From this animal into the mouth of that one. Okay? Got to make sure you get that. Okay, one more thing before we go ahead and call this it for tonight. Autotrophs, your producers, they do primary productivity. That's the measure of how much photosynthesis and stuff they do. We're going to go through it in more detail in a second. Heterotrophs, your consumers, do secondary productivity. You just have to remember that. Primary productivity by far is the most important one. I have actually never seen secondary productivity show up on your AP exam, but I think you should know it, just in general. Primary productivity, again, done by your producers and autotrophs. GPP, that's gross primary productivity. That is the total amount of photosynthesis a plant carries out. Very difficult to measure. Okay? NPP is your net primary productivity. That is your biomass of your plant. That's very easy to do in an experiment. You measure your plant at the start of the experiment. You measure it at the end of this experiment. The weight it's gained is the biomass that's been added. We get an equation. NPP, net primary productivity, equals GPP, gross primary productivity minus your respiration. Okay, all living things have to do respiration. So if I do all this photosynthesis and I use some of it for respiration so I can move, what is left should be biomass, should be sugar that I'm going to store as biomass. So NPP equals GPP minus R. If I give you an equation with 3 variables and I give you any 2 of those variables, I give you numbers for 2 of these, you can calculate the third one, okay, which is often what they do. Okay, in secondary productivity, it's a little bit more difficult. This is GSP, excuse the typo, gross secondary productivity. That's the food absorbed. So how much food did you eat minus fecal material? That's how much food you actually took into your body, how much energy you took in. This we can actually measure. You give an animal the food, see how much of it it eats, minus the fecal material it produces, you can determine the GSP. NSP, net secondary productivity, also very, very easy to determine for organisms. You weigh the bunny at the start of the experiment, you weigh the bunny at the end of the experiment, and then that difference, that weight gain, is your biomass. That's your net secondary productivity. Again, same equation, just the S rather than the P. So we have net secondary productivity, NSP, equals GSP minus R. So how much food did you absorb minus the respiration you used to move? That will give you your biomass. If these two are equal, your biomass has not changed, your weight stays the same. If the GSP is higher than the R, then you're going to gain weight. So again, 3 variables, any 2 of these variables given to you, you can calculate the third. Okay, I think we're done for tonight. Let's see how this goes. Hope everybody has a great evening. Night. Good night.